The Jewish people are in a time of distress. The events that have taken place in the last few days in the Holy Land, land of Israel, are very troubling. The loss of life, the terrible loss of life, the kidnappings, the hostages, the threats. This is a time when the Jewish people have to take stock of what it means to be a Jew and our responsibility for one another. All of the Jewish people are one family, and we are all responsible for one another, and we must care for one another. We might have differences, and those are legitimate. We like to argue. We're searching for the truth, and we argue a lot, but we can never forget of the intrinsic unity, the essential unity of the Jewish people. And in a time like this, in a time of crisis, we have to think of what it is that we can do. Obviously, those who are able to defend Israel and its population militarily have a mitzvah, have a divine commandment to do so, saving lives, protecting lives, defending oneself and one's family members and one's people is a biblical obligation. But for those of us who live here in the diaspora and we're not capable of joining the military forces to save the Jewish people from destruction, which is what the terrorists have in mind and had in mind when they entered into Israel to murder every man, woman, and child in the most barbaric and savage ways. So our way of defending Israel is spiritual, and this involves many different things. Number one, the idea of Jewish unity. It's crucial in a time like this to put aside our differences, not to change our opinions necessarily, but to put aside our differences that divide us and unite together with one goal of bringing Israel to a state of peace by eliminating the threat to its existence and to its survival. Number two, this is a time when we must emphasize the importance of our faith in God. It's God who is capable of saving us, is capable of protecting us. And when we have that faith and trust in God, that itself creates a spiritual power, a spiritual force that will vanquish the enemy and bring us to a state of peace. And that involves praying. If a person does not know how to pray, you can pray in any language, beseech God, implore God to bring peace to the land of Israel. There's a special book, biblical book called the Book of Psalms, Tehillim. Those are especially very powerful prayers that we should all try to recite. Several Psalms. Psalm 20 is a very important one and very, very appropriate for this time. In addition to prayer, trust in God is also the importance of observing the commandments. And there are special commandments that have a special characteristic of protecting Jews during times of war. That is the mitzvah of tefillin. Men over the age of 13 should try to put on tefillin every day, preferably in the morning with morning prayers, but any time of the day one could put on tefillin. Tefillin, our sages tell us, creates the power for the soldiers who are fighting their enemies to prevail in a time of battle. The mitzvah of mezuzah, making sure that we have mezuzahs on our doorposts. Mezuzah, the Talmud tells us, is a mitzvah, a commandment that has one of its characteristics is protection. It protects us in our homes and out of our homes, and it brings protection also to the entire Jewish people who are in great need of that protection right now, especially the heroic soldiers who are risking their lives to save the Jewish people. In addition to the practical mitzvah of tefillin and mezuzah, Jewish women in particular should light the Shabbat candles this Friday before sunset. It's very important to light the candles because the darkness that is brought into the world through these savages, through these terrible terrorist attacks, will be dispelled through a little light. And what is more powerful than the light that a woman kindles before Shabbat? But it's important that we do it before sunset, because after sunset, lighting a fire is a violation of the Shabbat. And while we're talking about Shabbat, it's important to strengthen the observance of Shabbat by making Kiddush and eating Shabbat meals and not refraining from work. In addition to all this, not to lose our faith that God has promised us that he will bring us the Mashiach who will usher in a time of universal peace, and that every time we express our desire for Mashiach, that itself, and our anticipation for his coming and for the Messianic age, that itself accelerates his coming and will bring us to the point where we will no longer have to talk about terrorism, we'll no longer have to talk about war and conflict, but it will be a world that will be enveloped with God's light, and that will bring ultimate and universal peace and eternal peace to the Jewish people and to the entire world. There's one other mitzvah that hastens redemption, and that is the mitzvah of tzedakah, of giving charity, especially if it's a charity that is involved with helping Jews living in the land of Israel. And that, too, our sages tell us, will accelerate the final redemption.